Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 6, Monday Night Football edition. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, another glorious Sunday in the books, my friend.
I don't know if glorious is quite the describing word there, sir.
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to be glass half full. I'm trying to keep a smile on my face to keep from crying sometimes. But the gambling gods, they continue to push us to the brink of pulling our hair out. And alas, this is where we are at basically the 1/3 mark of the NFL regular season.
It's just been a weird season in general. You're watching a lot of wrong side winners come to fruition. You know, you go through yesterday's games in general and you start to scratch your head and wonder, you know, we'll get to a few of them, but, you know, how the Commanders-Falcons game doesn't go over. 27 points at the half, 40.5 is the number. The game in London, right? Very sharp over money there, sending that from 40.5 out to as high as 42. And, you know, you just scratch your head how a game like that doesn't go over. Jets-Eagles in the first half. I mean, I know they leave the first half with 23 points. Should have been substantially more. That was a game that, got steamed out from 41 to 43.5. It just doesn't go over. And I know a couple of these games, again, we'll talk about, but just been some weird variance. Quarterback play seems to be down across the board. Creativity on offense seems to be down. Number of drives seem to be down. You're just wondering kind of when we start to see a little bit of the floor come in terms of market pricing on totals. We're down about 4.5 points on average with some of these totals relative to the last few years. Like, are you going to keep going under some of these depressed numbers? Well, it seemed to work yesterday. A lot of unders yesterday. So just some funky stuff in terms of, and we always address, our games, and the Monday show doesn't have as many listeners as the Thursday show, but, was the Patriots +3 the greatest bet in the world? Probably not, but it was always going to be a grinder. It was never going to look pretty. And listen, you were a positive 10% in net success rate against the Raiders yesterday. And, you have a turnover that wasn't created by the defense in the red zone. I mean, I understand everyone's going to say Mac Jones sucks. That's him. But, Hunter Henry's wide open there. You get a 70-yard explosive touchdown called back for a phantom hold. And then obviously, that last play when you think you've got a winner there, taking the sack just did us in there. So certainly have some negative variance, and if you bet long enough, you're going to have an occasional streak that's bad. I think in general, the one thing that we have said, and I know a lot of people don't like to listen, but the reason we have a college football podcast, the reason we have a newsletter, we're trying to give you more plus EV plays. And the larger the sample size, the less that negative variance can impact it. So, yeah, the Patriots didn't cover yesterday because of a late game safety. College football went 2-0. Newsletter won again. So it would have been nice to go 4-0 for the Bet the Board family, but you got to, even if you hate college football, right, just go into it and taking the best bet, knowing that it has an edge, and just moving upon your day. If you have your money invested in your 401k, you don't need to eye fuck the results every 24 hours, right? This is kind of the same thought process here. You don't need to actually watch the college game to get your money in with an edge. So, ideally we would like the NFL to be better than 1-6 right now. Probably should be. Likely results, should be about 3-4. Which is manageable when everything else is rolling.
No, you're exactly right. And look, this is a marathon, not a sprint. I know it's not what listeners want to hear. And to some of their credit, the ones that have been with us since day one, a lot more understanding when things unfold the way they did yesterday at Allegiant Stadium. Devontae Parker, stone cold drop the play before. Then you have Mac Jones operating from the end zone, and the rest is history. So we've always been transparent in our wins and our losses, and there's no doubt it frustrates us to no end as much as it's frustrating you. But, with that in the rearview mirror, typically on Mondays we do the good, the bad, and the ugly. But you brought up an interesting point, talking about some of the ridiculous outcomes we saw if you're watching the scoreboard instead of digging into the box score. And so I think that's probably the best way to approach things this Monday morning as we look to unpack some of the things. And maybe the best place to start is with Sunday Night Football, where the game was played at an absolute snail's pace. The Giants did things historically that we've never seen done in terms of goal to go from the 1 yard line, not once but twice, coming away with no points. Out rushing, out passing, missing fewer field goals, still on the wrong side of the ledger from a straight up standpoint, albeit with a rocking chair cover when the team's laying 15.5 you're playing against and only score 14. But what are we to make of what we saw last night? Not so much from the Giants, who fought tooth and nail and we know are undermanned, but from the Buffalo Bills looking like they didn't have much direction whatsoever on the offensive side of the ball.
So you give Brian Daboll, and this will be surprising to some to hear this, you give him credit for knowing the Bills' offense inside and out. Player tendencies, play caller habits, you name it. And that helped Wink Martindale's defense play as good as they possibly could. But the effort gets completely wasted because Brian Daboll's anemic offense. And I get it. Offensive linemen are starting that. We're on the couch a few weeks ago. That was actually a fun intro from Pew. You have a backup quarterback. But there just needs to be more creativity. There needs to be more aggression on the road, knowing you're a 15.5-point underdog. 1st and goal from the 9, settle for a field goal. 1st and 10 from the 19, run on 1st down. Run on 2nd down, field goal, right? 4th and inches from the Buffalo 11. You elect to kick a field goal to take a 2-point lead, thinking that you're just going to shut out Josh Allen in this game from finding the end zone or moving his offense into field goal range.
Look, Payne, Jason Sehorn, Lawrence Taylor, and Carlton Banks could have been walking through that door for the final drive the way that Brian Daboll went about approaching things.
They did have those throwback unis on, which were awesome. But I mean, 4th and an inch, like call a QB sneak. Then you have the 2 trips to the 1 yard line. Came away with 0 points on those 2 trips. Whether it's on Tyrod to know you can't run with a run pass option called, so be it. Call a play that's just a pass from a heavy set, so it still appears the defense has to defend both. You need a yard on the final play, sure. Darren Waller's held, should have been a penalty. But why not QB sneak there? Like, time is no object at that point. Is any defense really stopping a mobile QB that's compact and low to the ground with Saquon and his thunder thighs like pushing from behind? Probably not. And so it's just kind of difficult. I saw a couple of Giants fans tweeting yesterday and have heard some of the local media. I get it. There's some frustration, but the Giants aren't a good football team. They weren't a good football team last year either. They were just confident. They had a new voice. They had some positive variance, easy schedule, the element of surprise of what Brian Daboll would do. We're now seeing it wasn't a good football team, and certainly the coaching and creativity has regressed a little bit this year.
Yeah, it's always tough. Look, we knew that the Giants are one of the sharpest win totals under, and with good reason for what we've seen from them so far this season. We'll see if Daniel Jones is back under center for a divisional matchup with the Washington Commanders. Cleveland Browns, Payne, defensively put up their Mona Lisa of sorts. You brought an interesting nugget to my attention before that game against the 49ers, knowing that Jim Schwartz has had a track record with Kyle Shanahan and done an outstanding job keeping his offense at bay. Now, obviously, a banged-up CMC and Deebo Samuel helped the cause tremendously, but look, the Browns deserve full marks for going out there, doing what nobody else in the league has done to Brock Purdy, at least during the regular season, and if it wasn't for P.J. Walker doing his best to give the game away, the Browns probably win that thing comfortably with the way they shut down the 49ers after the opening drive.
Yeah, Just more frustration, though. I think that's one of those games where, we talk on the podcast and we're like, hey, we would have been lining up here on the Browns. It was a very good spot, very good matchup. Let's take the 4.5 with Deshaun. He's not out there. So when we break the game down on Thursday, the line's 7. Very tough to give that out when you know in 12 hours the game's going to go to 10. Now, all numbers covered, did not matter. But I just one of those games that's a little wonky, right? The 49ers scored on their script. So now 38 points on 6 opening drives for Kyle Shanahan this season. And then oddly, there was some questionable effort on the final drive for the Browns defense when they just let Brandon Ayuk turn a 4-yard catch into 25 that set up a very makeable field goal attempt to win the game. But past those 2 drives, it was a lights-out performance for the Browns defense. Held the 49ers offense to a 35% success rate, second best mark of the week. Brock Purdy, you mentioned, looked like a normal human because he had been playing like an immortal status through 5 games. He had a 29% success rate on his dropbacks. JOK was everywhere. Delvin Tomlinson was a one-man band inside, 16% pass rush win rate, and you hit it perfectly. Despite P.J. Walker doing his best to give the game away multiple times, the Browns pulled off the upset. Brock Purdy missed some open throws, and then, sometimes you have the good fortunes of an attrition sport where Debo and CMC go down.
It's just wild to watch, and we talk about it all the time. What goes up must come down. The 49ers play their perfect game the week before on Sunday Night Football against the Cowboys and meet their match traveling across the country. They will have an extra day of rest and more on some of those injuries in terms of how they'll impact the handicap and your fantasy lineup from the good doc Deepak later on in the program. Payne, you mentioned that Eagles-Jets game and the way it died as at halftime. The Jets defense deserves a world of credit going into that game without their first, second, and fourth best corners in Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, and Brandon Eccles. Look, we said for this defense to be elite, they had to take the next step from what we saw last year in forced turnovers. They did that in the win, beating Philadelphia, knocking Coach Sirianni's team from the ranks of the unbeaten.
This was a really weird watch. And I'll probably go back and dig in again because I have the numbers. But it was just, Robert Saleh was juiced up from the upset win. And you stick a mic in front of someone as their adrenaline's pumping and there's a better chance for a great soundbite. And sure enough, I don't know if you heard this or not, but Robert Saleh said his defense has embarrassed opposing offenses this season. Now, we've talked about it. But the Jets' defense had been middling through 5 games, 15th in schedule-adjusted efficiency and 19th in EPA per play allowed. In the first half, the Jets allowed nearly 52% of the Eagles' plays to great successful, as the 21st best mark in the league so far this week. But the Jets' defense turned the Eagles over twice in the first half when Philly was in plus territory, so they survived. And I think you hit it perfectly. What makes the Jets' defensive performance look better than it was is you're down your number 1, your number 2, your number 3, and your number 5 cornerbacks. And you outscore the Eagles' offense with your defense in the second half. These are just tough games to recap, right? Saturday, I'll just be honest with you, we went over 41 in this game. Another group came in about 40 seconds after us when the Sauce Gardner news went live from Adam Schefter, and it sent the game to 42.5. Did not matter. Game day steam came in, and we're like, hey, we're going to send this game to a peak of 43.5. The Eagles have 4 drives in the first half, score 2 touchdowns, turn it over twice in plus territory. Jets have 5 drives in the first half, forced to kick 3 red zone field goals, and then they turned it over on downs in the green zone. Should have been far more points, but still felt okay with 23 in the first half. Not in a million years could you envision the Eagles being shut out in the second half against a beat-up Jets secondary, because the best part of the Jets defense, their D-line, and you have an elite offensive line. So I don't know what I watched in that second half, so I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it a second time now that I have the data to kind of compare.
No doubt about it, and the one thing that Eagles fans aren't going to be thrilled with, not only do you get saddled with a loss, a potential absence for Lane Johnson along that offensive line if he's dealing with a high ankle sprain, even if he were able to run it back on Sunday Night Football against the Miami Dolphins, we're led to believe that he won't be anywhere close to 100% if he doesn't miss extended time. We talk about things that confuse us and leave us scratching our heads, but the Detroit Lions, Payne have been the one common denominator so far in the National Football League, at least so far. I mean, they completely suffocated the Bucs and only allowed 2 red zone trips. Now, they weren't proficient on offense by any stretch of the imagination, only 2 red zone trips in their own right, but they did enough on both sides of the ball to go into hostile territory, win convincingly, despite the betting market showing a ton of support for Tampa as a 3.5-point home underdog.
Yeah, we deep dove the Lions game on Thursday, and I believe, I don't know if this is a conversation between you and me off air, if it was on the pod. We said we were dying for a spot to fade the overrated Buccaneers. And then we elected to pass after some respected Tampa money showed, and the Lions injury report didn't look great. So that was clearly a mistake. The Lions defense showed up, and Jared Goff and the receivers carried a one-dimensional offense. And I think that's promising to see. Goff, St. Brown, Jameson Williams back giving you that explosive threat. Sam Laporta was solid, battled through a little bit of an injury there. But seeing that offense go out on the road without help from the ground game and win is very impressive. Tampa's front held the Lions to a 23% rushing success rate. We know the Lions want to be more physical and rely on a really good O-line, but I thought that was a really solid effort from the Lions. This is a damn good team. I think the question and the better, like, higher level thought here is, like, how good are the Lions? I mean, they lost to the Chiefs on paper with KC missing about $200 million worth of players. Lost to the Seahawks at home. Beat the Falcons, Packers, Panthers, and Buccaneers. Now, Detroit's been dominant in those 4 wins, but all 4 of those teams likely finish with below 500 records unless there's some changes. So I'm going to ask you this. Are the Lions a top 5 team?
You know what? I don't think they are a top 5 team, because if I'm putting them up there against the truly elite in the league, and Kansas City's at full strength for that season opener, I think the result's significantly different. Quite honestly, though, I'm not sure you have to be a top 5 team to win the NFC right now. The balance of power is clearly in the AFC, and as the Lions continue to grow in confidence, they get a little healthier, they figure out what they have with all of their weapons. This is no doubt going to be a team that's going to be formidable, going to have to earn their way in, but no, I'm not sure the Lions, despite how they're being priced and what we've seen, are a top 5 team in the league if you look from top to bottom.
Yeah, they're just outside our top 5. Clear top 10 team, but they're kind of hovering in that 7 range right now for us. So great effort, and I'm interested to see what the offense looks like, if it can take another step when you get Gibbs back, because now all of a sudden you have Gibbs with Jameson Williams, 2 explosive guys. You have Amaron and Laporta kind of doing their thing over the middle of the field. Goff on the road yesterday was pinpoint accurate, hit some of those areas that you need to hit against that Tampa defense, right? That deep middle we were talking about. You saw Amaron come back, and he was questionable for the game, but vital to the win there.
Yeah, I mean, look, this team hasn't scratched the surface of what they're going to be capable of accomplishing. So if you're a Lions fan, this isn't meant to be disparaging by any stretch of the imagination, that this team is going to trend up, especially with better health. They may have the division clinched by Halloween, the way everything is trending, and you'll be able to work out a lot of kinks over the latter 2 months of the regular season, figuring out exactly what you're going to be going into the postseason. We talk about teams being top 5 or not top 5. The Bengals were picked by many Payne to be a top 5 team this season. They've looked anything but a dominant force. Now, don't tell that to those folks that laid the 3 with Cincinnati. They were able to laugh their way to the window with a 17-13 victory against the Seattle Seahawks. And the Bengals did so with 214 yards and 4 yards per play. They had 20 plays that covered 142 yards for 2 touchdown drives to start the game. And I was left going, all right, this is Joe Burrow. The Bengals offense is back. And then over the next 33 plays, Payne, they gained 72 yards total, and it was Seattle's red zone ineffectiveness that ultimately cost the Seahawks a highly contested potential road victory.
This was one of those battles that's really interesting in terms of how you attack a game. Because if your thesis was, hey, Joe Burrow's back and healthy, your thought process is, how could this game be 2.5? The offseason number was 6. And so there was sharp Bengals money on Thursday and Friday that sent the game to the key of 3. But then all of a sudden, there was a little bit of a different thought process. On game day, there was very sharp Seahawks money at +3. And the craziness that is this NFL season through 6 weeks, the great bet on Seattle +3 lost. And Burrow's no doubt healthier right now. But I think we kind of said last Monday, pump the brakes, thinking Cincinnati's offense as a whole is all the way back because they hung 34 points on a Cardinals defense that gave up 31 to the Giants in a singular half. It was nothing but a two-man game where Burrow chucked to Chase and Jonathan Gannon couldn't figure out how to prepare for that or make an in-game adjustment at any point. And we saw, I think Seattle's defense is actually trending a little bit better quietly. They're able to really stop the run. They got pressure yesterday. You have two nice young corners in Woolen and Witherspoon. But you look at that second half yesterday, the Bengals had a negative 0.46 EPA per play and a 32% success rate. You mentioned some of those red zone woes for Seattle. 5 trips to the Bengals red zone, only got 1 touchdown. Another dead wrong side that won.
That may go down, by the way, as the most inexplicable half of football. The Giants scoring 31 points in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals. But the one thing I will say is whatever Jonathan Gannon is saying at halftime of these Arizona Cardinals games, if they're bad orange slices or the nutrition plan needs to be overhauled, it sure as shit ain't working. Because you look at Arizona, they've been outstanding in the first half and being able to frustrate their opponents, but they make absolutely no adjustments in the second half. The offense looks like it's running on fumes. And for those folks that are halftime bettors, keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at some of these first half performances for Arizona, because there's no team that puts together 2 more diametrically opposed halves each and every Sunday than what we've seen from Arizona so far. To kind of put a bow on encapsulating what we saw on Sunday, Payne, we may as well go full circle to the London game, and you mentioned it. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens are supposed to be the class of the AFC North. They have all of these weapons. They have a new look offensive philosophy with Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator, but John Harbaugh appears to be neutered when it comes to being aggressive and going for it on 4th down. I know they wanted to treat all the fans overseas to an EPL-style match to steal your line, but Justin Tucker kicking 37 field goals inside of 30 yards, not going to be the blueprint for success. And there was a chance that the Ravens almost completely pissed that game away because they were conservative, because they settled for field goals instead of trying to score touchdowns every time they got into that green and red area.
6 trips to the red zone and only 1 touchdown, and it came off script. You know, Lamar finagled his way out of the pocket. Zay Flowers breaks off his route and presented a nice target for Lamar. But, yeah, I mean, you think about that game in general. 22 of Lamar Jackson's 30 attempts never made it more than 9 yards downfield. 7 of the 30 were behind the line of scrimmage. That can't be the game plan against the Titans secondary, which is already horrific and was down at starting slot corner. And basically anytime the Ravens reached the red zone, they abandoned what got them there. And it felt like they reverted back to the Greg Roman style of offense. And you mentioned it, Harbaugh had some jelly in the belly. And I know Justin Tucker is automatic, so it kind of changes the calculus a bit. But super conservative offensively for Baltimore, and you know, it almost bit them in the butt. Fortunately, the Titans don't have much juice on offense, and then Malik Willis came in and continued to do the only thing you couldn't do in many of those situations, which was pat the ball, hold on to it, and take sacks. And if that was a living, breathing offense on the other side of the ball, it probably wouldn't have ended up as well for Baltimore.
That might have been the only time I thought it was good for the Ravens to kick a short field goal. When they had a 21-13 lead, they decided to go with Mark Andrews in short yardage. Not sure if he made it or not, but knowing that Ryan Tannehill appeared to be done for the day and that Malik Willis was going to have to lead them back down 2 scores, kicking the field goal on 4th and inches, I'll give Harbaugh a free pass for that one. Still almost ended up costing them as the Titans found a way to get back into it, but weren't able to get over the hump. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod and sign up for the absolutely free Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered right to your inbox every single Friday. Like Payne said, an easy rocking chair winner for Joe Mixon under 14.5 in his longest rush, doing everything we can to help build your bankroll throughout the course of this football season. You know, Payne, we peel back the curtain, and every now and again, or probably more often than I'm willing to admit, the host isn't always as prepared as he needs to be, and I put a bow on some of the proverbial good, bad, and ugly maybe a little bit faster than I should have. The one team we didn't touch on that I wanted to get your take was the Commanders. You mentioned them going out there, building a 2-score lead at one point, winning the game 24-16. All look great if you're paying attention to the scoreboard cosmetics. You start to dig into the box score. You look at the total yardage, yards per play, and everything else, and you go, how the hell were the Commanders able to come out of Atlanta on the road and get an outright win, albeit as a small pup?
with 11 days to prepare. It's just how Ron Rivera and Eric Bieniemy drew it up to pull off the road win. Gain 193 yards of offense, give up 402 yards on defense. Never a doubt. Turnovers, special teams, won the fourth down variance battle. The only thing you could say Washington did extremely well is they shut down Atlanta's ground game, held the Falcons to an 18% rushing success rate. The highly paid front four of the Commanders finally showed up for the first time this season there. And Sam Howell didn't turn the ball over. But that's a game that, in the box score, in the data, Atlanta wins comfortably, frequently. So that was another one of those wrong side winners.
Kudos to you, Drake London. You finally went out there and performed like a first-round draft pick when the Falcons figure out how to use you, allowing him to take advantage of some of those man-to-man opportunities downfield with some big catches, albeit in a losing effort for the Falcons, who displayed a vertical passing game only when they absolutely have to throw the football. Let that be a lesson to Arthur Smith. Maybe show a little bit more balance week in, week out, and this offense can hum at a much higher clip than what we've seen so far. But when we talk about all the players that made impacts on the field on Sunday, Payne, there were a number of players who didn't complete the full 60 minutes. And when you're looking to try and identify who may or may not be out there for your favorite teams before you hit that fantasy waiver wire, Dr. Deepak Chona, who you can follow at SportMD Analysis, provides a lengthy and quite thorough breakdown of who won't be out there for Week 7.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, let's do it. So we start with Christian McCaffrey. Now, we have two pieces of promising news. One is that the average oblique strain is only about a 1 to 2 week injury, and most players return with a low performance impact. We don't know yet the severity on Christian McCaffrey, but we do know that he tried to go back in after sustaining the injury, and of course wasn't really able to play at that point. But just the fact that he wasn't immediately ruled out does suggest it's not on the highly severe end of the spectrum. So he'll probably get an MRI today, and then we'll know a little more. But again, rare to have a big absence from this. And then we have Deebo Samuel, also some reason for optimism. So he had negative x-rays, and then the Niners comments suggested that he will likely be fine in the relatively near term. And the most common situation here would be a mild AC joint sprain. And we've seen a number of these this season. The average is about 2 weeks, and most players would return with a mild performance hit. However, Deebo Samuel does have a history of playing through some minor injuries. So it wouldn't be all that surprising if he's out there this coming week. If he is, I would expect at least a mild dip to his performance. And then we have Justin Fields, a little more concerning here. Now, his throwing hand thumb dislocated. They popped it back in. There was no fracture on the x-ray, which is definitely good news because most of those would have required surgery. But now he needs an MRI. The reason for that is there are a series of ligaments around the thumb, and the most concerning one, in my opinion, would be the ulnar collateral ligament, the UCL of the thumb. If that is not discreetly torn, then we'd call it a sprain, and this would be about pain control with grip of the ball. If it is torn, however, he'd probably need surgery, and that usually means at least about 6 weeks out. Now, in the case of just a sprain, why was it so hard for him to grip the ball? What happens after a dislocation is that the whole area swells up, and when the area swells up, one, you have limited range of motion just because the fluid in the area is preventing physically you from moving properly. But the other is that the pain and the swelling prevents the muscles from firing, and it's sort of a neurological pathway that does that. So it wouldn't be all that surprising, even in the case of just a bad sprain with the dislocation, that you wouldn't have full ability to grip the ball. So we do expect Justin Fields, given that he's probably playing for his NFL future, to hustle back as soon as possible. So in the best case scenario, we could be looking at about a 2-week return. Then we have David Montgomery. Now, sounds like he's dealing with a bruise to his rib and cartilage area. He'll probably get an MRI today. These are structurally stable, but they're also very, very painful. And the data slightly favors him missing 1 week, but we'll see how his practice progression goes. There are cases where players get a numbing injection, wear some protective padding, and then play the following week, usually with some degree of performance hit. And then Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, he went to the hospital, and that obviously sounds concerning. He's likely getting a CT scan to rule out any major fractures of his spine and also get a sort of evaluation of his internal organs, particularly his kidney, based on where he got hit. Now, the return will vary a lot depending on the severity, but of course, given that he went to the hospital, we're thinking a little bit on the higher end, and he probably misses next week. And then we have Tyreek Hill. Optimism here. He left, but then he returned, and he actually had a big play even after he returned. Reportedly was just cramping. That doesn't carry any lingering impact or risk going forward. And then less optimism on the Eagles' Lane Johnson. He, by video, looked like he sustained a high ankle sprain. Typically, these are multi-week absences for offensive linemen. Lane Johnson's as tough as it comes. You may remember last year, towards the end of the year, he played through what was ultimately a surgical injury, but that was for the playoffs and for the Super Bowl. I don't suspect that'll be the case this early in the season. I think he'll probably rest it and be back in about 4 weeks. And then we have Saquon Barkley, who just came back from his high ankle. Didn't look particularly efficient, I would say, and when he was cutting off of that ankle, it did seem like he had limitations, and that was to be expected this early after that injury. Now, the typical performance hit at this point for Saquon Barkley and someone of his profile would be about 20%, which I think it's fair to say that's about what he had. And then that goes down to 10% next week. So there's a little bit of an elevated re-injury risk for the next 3 to 4 weeks, but Saquon Barkley should be improving quite a bit between this week and next. And 1 week further into the progression is Austin Eckler, and he had the high ankle week 1, and now he's coming back. Austin Eckler projects, as I mentioned, to have about a 10% production hit, and that should improve over the next 2 weeks. And then with Austin Eckler, you do similarly see a relatively high re-injury risk. But if both Saquon and Austin Eckler avoid that outcome for the next 3 weeks, then we're probably looking at basically back to their running back elite status. And then Justin Herbert. Now, I expect Justin Herbert to be pretty much at peak production despite his finger fracture dislocation on his non-throwing hand. He will be wearing a glove to help grip the ball, and you probably won't see him be extending the ball when he's running. You're more likely to slide to protect it. The main change here is that he will probably be in the shotgun more frequently, since it does mitigate the risk of hitting the finger on the center QB snap exchange. There is a mild risk of re-injuring this if he takes a bad fall, but even then, he could probably keep playing with a splint on the finger like he did in week 4. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who was, of course, out this week. His progression suggests that they're treating this like a moderate severity hamstring. That averages about 3 weeks. Since his injury occurred mid last week, that would lean us towards 1 more week out before his return. But we'll, of course, be able to update that with a little more accuracy following this week's practice progression. And then we have Joe Burrow. Now, he's looking a little better each week. The performance impact of that calf is almost certainly recovering. We still have to cross our fingers for about another 2 games that he doesn't have a re-injury to this area. And if we reach that point, then his re-injury risk substantially decreases at about the 6 to 7 week mark. And all signs are pointing up so far. So we're optimistic on Burrow. Then we have Deshaun Watson. Now, he has a contusion to his rotator cuff. It is clearly must be pretty severe if if it's causing him to miss this much time. Now, the other thing with Deshaun Watson to keep in mind is that returning to game action is really tied closely to the player's psychology. And the Browns have interestingly made it abundantly clear that Watson has been cleared for 2 weeks now. So this suggests to us that it's no longer just a medical decision. It's now more so up to him. Regardless, we would say that most contusions in 4 weeks' time do a lot better. They improve quite significantly from week to week. So there's no real telling when Deshaun Watson decides to come back, but my gut is that that happens in the next 1 to 2 weeks. And then we have Daniel Jones. Now, he is likely playing it safe because a strained neck may decrease his ability to protect that area when he's getting hit, and he has a pretty notable injury history with a surgical history there. So the MRI report sounded relatively favorable. So in that case, we'd lean towards about a week 7 or 8 return. What one curveball may have been released last night is that they said he was having some shooting pains from his neck to his shoulder. And what we can't tell from that, there are muscles that go from your neck to your shoulder. So a strain would basically impact those as well and would explain those symptoms. But the key here is that there are also nerves that go in that direction. So a nerve being pinched would cause that symptom, and that is not something you can reasonably play through. However, if it's just the muscle, that strain should improve over the course of about 2 weeks. So we're not totally sure what to make of that most recent headline, but going into that announcement, we were leaning towards a week 7 or 8 return for Daniel Jones. Then we have Tank Dell. Now, he's very likely to come back this coming week, although the Texans are on bye, so it'll probably be the following, and at full strength. And then Roschon Johnson is a little bit of the same story, concussion protocol. About 3/4 of players would make it back the following week. And with Khalil Herbert out about 4 weeks, that the data does favor Roschon Johnson pretty much returning immediately to full workload. And then we have Justin Jefferson, who of course is on the IR. So at 4 weeks, they're going to reevaluate him. They might even do another MRI. Most players would be ready to return at 4 weeks, after 4 weeks out. The key with Justin Jefferson is that in all across multiple injuries, when players are on really bad teams, and especially now when they may be even tanking, you don't see players come back fast. And we saw this last year, end of last year, with Cooper Kupp's injury. And it does happen from time to time that players are not rushing back to help their bad teams. So it's hard to imagine that Justin Jefferson misses more than 6 weeks, but it may be a little more than 4. And then Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth, both with hamstring strains. Deontay Johnson's was a little more severe. They were of course on bye this week and very likely coming back this coming week. Now, with Deontay Johnson having had 4 weeks of rest, there is a little bit of an elevated re-injury risk, but his performance impact expects to be pretty low. Pat Freiermuth, with having less time to rest, he does expect to have a moderate performance impact that should recover over the course of the next 2 weeks. And again, a little bit of a moderately elevated re-injury risk as well. And then we have Devon Achane. It sounds like it was a little bit of a borderline call to put him on the IR to begin with. And when we look at average data on MCL sprains, it's usually 2 to 3 weeks. So IR is a little bit of an outlier there. He's a rookie. They have plenty of depth there. They're probably trying to keep him healthy for what is almost surely going to be a playoff run. So it's not totally outlandish, but we do very much expect to see Devon Achane back on the field when he's eligible after IR. Then we have Anthony Richardson. Now, Anthony Richardson is considering season-ending surgery, and these grade 3 AC joints are a little bit of a judgment call. Some players would have it, some players wouldn't. And there's not really clear data in the orthopedic science and literature on who should get it and whether it's better to treat this non-operatively or not. Now, my gut is that if Anthony Richardson were going to have it, he will have it this week, so we'll know pretty soon. But either way, I don't expect Anthony Richardson rushing back. 4 weeks is probably not a realistic timeline. It would probably be at least 6 if he treats this non-operatively. And then Aaron Jones. So he was on track to play and then had some sort of setback last week. And then they were on bye this week. So we very much expect Aaron Jones to return this coming week. The key is, though, for a hamstring strain that's been re-aggravated and a player of his age at running back, you will typically see some sort of committee work or workload limitation for Aaron Jones. The efficiency impact on a per touch basis tends to be relatively low when they come back, but usually not going to see a full workload right away. The re-injury risk is also a little bit of a concern, but I don't think we're hugely likely to see this given that he had last week off. And then Treylon Burks. So we may remember back to training camp when he sustained a knee sprain, and then he basically had some taping on his knee that suggested that he re-injured it. Although the Titans said this isn't necessarily the case, the fact that it's the same knee in itself moderately concerning. And they are on bye this coming week. I do expect Treylon Burks back on the practice field and likely back in the game the following week. But with this having happened twice on the same knee, we do expect some degree of performance impact. It's going to be a high re-injury risk for the rest of the year. Then a little bit of optimism on a couple of post-operative guys. First, Jalen Ramsey. Now, he was in late July, had a meniscus repair, and the average timeline on that is about 3 to 4 months, at least on the early side. The average, I should say, is 4 to 6 months, but Jalen Ramsey had what was likely a small repair done, and he is an elite 90-plus percentile athlete. So given that, for him, the average would be about 4 months' time, and that would put him into November. So we do anticipate him coming back at the end of next month. And then Aaron Rodgers. Now, this one, there's really no data to go off of. The earliest Achilles return we've seen in the recent NFL history was Cam Akers at about 5 to 6 months. Aaron Rodgers is coming back to a very different position, of course, but given the way he was walking and he was on the field throwing, these are very promising signs, of course, but the key to remember with Aaron Rodgers is that this is not his back leg, his plant leg for throwing. So we think that he has a chance. It's never been done. I don't really have data to go off of here. But tendon healing would be about 3 months. And so you would think that if Aaron Rodgers is out there, he's of course going to have major limitations, limited mobility, limited ability to really drop back. He may be in the shotgun a lot. And he's likely going to have some limitations if that Jets O-line is struggling as well. But there is a chance, and I don't think I would rule out a January return at this point. And that's all I got for now, so I would kick it back over.
Poor Bears fans, Payne. Justin Fields starting to put it all together, and then he ends up with a dislocated thumb, listening to Deepak talk about the potential ramifications of surgery. I mean, I guess if you're Chicago, the silver lining is that Carolina continues to lose. You don't win another game this season. Maybe you're drafting 1 and 2, and they can pick up another quarterback who we have question marks about at the top of the draft in Caleb Williams.
Where you go, Drake May. Quite the
My gut is you fire the head coach, you bring in an offensive mind, and you get the pocket passer in Drake May, who's shown command of an NFL-style offense, at least at the college level.
Drake can also move a little bit. Don't discredit him there. Is he Caleb Williams? No, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think Caleb Williams, if he finds the right OC head coach combination, some of the bad habits will start to leave. I know this is the NFL podcast, but we had talked a little bit, and I didn't mention or break down that side of the ball in the Notre Dame game, but just from what I had seen, just very lazy offense, backyard football from Caleb Williams, where you'd see him take a shotgun snap and without moving his feet, just sidearm it out to a wide receiver screen, just not really playing within the flow of the offense in general, throwing off the back foot. A lot of bad habits it seems he's picked up over the last 12 months. So maybe a good OC head coach combination will get him back on track.
not a great weekend overall in the college and pro ranks. If you were a quarterback under the tutelage of Lincoln Riley, you look at Caleb Williams' performance, Jalen Hurts, some poor decision-making, Kyler Murray, of course, not back, and then Baker Mayfield, the only one who gets a little bit of a free pass, knowing that he was going up against a much more tenacious Lions defense. But we did talk about the deep dive there, knowing third down variance was going to come, and it reared its ugly head for that Tampa offense. I know a lot of listeners have grown accustomed to us talking look-ahead lines at this portion of the program as well, but a lot of these numbers, we're still dealing with some injuries. We've seen a lot more movement on totals, so we figured we'd breeze through that and focus a little bit more energy on the Monday Night Football game, which is a nice one. Two teams trying to figure out exactly what their identity is going to be. And when we look at the Chargers, fresh off a bye, they find themselves as a 1.5-point underdog against the Dallas Cowboys. And let's not sugarcoat it. This is going to feel like a Dallas Cowboys home game at SoFi Stadium. We know that they run their fall camp in Oxnard, California. This will be a difficult environment for the home team, but let's see what we get from the Cowboys if they're able to bounce back from a disappointing, to say the least, performance last Sunday night. And we know this is a Chargers team that's got a knack for playing close games and one possession in that. But when you look at the Cowboys, each of their first 5 games this year has been decided by double digits. Last week marked the 4th largest loss following a 35-point win by any team in the NFL since 1970. But the Cowboys, to their credit, have shown a little bit of resilience. They've now won 7 straight games after a loss, outscoring their opponents 240-106. It's the second longest active win streak in the NFL after a loss, behind just the Chiefs, who've done it 8 times. The Chargers, you can say what you want about Brandon Staley, but he typically gets his teams to perform at a high level when they're disrespected in the betting market. An 11-game sample size, the Chargers have gone 8-3 ATS. Payne, the Cowboys injury report coming into this week appeared to be an absolute mash unit. Now, it's got trended in the correct direction. It doesn't appear they're going to be down a ton of key cogs. We know Leighton Vander Esch and CJ Goodwin are going to be out. But when you look at this Cowboys offensive line, I mean, they've had players into the lineup. They've had players out of the lineup. How important is some continuity with that particular grouping, knowing that Dak Prescott hasn't played at a high level, and this Mike McCarthy offense that was all about running the damn ball is running at the exact same clip that we saw last year with Kellen Moore calling plays?
There was a lot to unpack there. And I think...
You don't have to unpack it all. It's just a chance for me to vent about the Cowboys and get some of that anger and hostility out 8 days later for the effort against the 49ers.
There's a saying, a solution in search of a problem. And that's what it feels like Mike McCarthy has done here. Completely changed a Cowboys offense that didn't need changing, because Mike McCarthy, who claims he spent his year or 2 years away from football deep diving analytics, somehow he came away not understanding variance. And you look at...
Sounds like my time in academia trying to learn physics for 2 years. I got a D 1 year and didn't even finish the second year with the class.
So if you think about Kellen Moore, who's also a part of this game this evening, he had this aggressive downfield offense last year. And now all of a sudden you have what is being called the Texas Coast offense that Mike McCarthy runs, very much horizontal. And the idea was like, hey, we're going to design this to help Dak limit picks with shorter throws. But the reality is Dak was just unlucky last year. And I understand he threw 3 picks against San Francisco, and everyone says Dak sucks. Is he like an elite quarterback? No. Is he somewhere in the middle of like tier 2, sitting in like the 8 to 15 range, depending on performance? I think so. And if you look last year, like half of Dak's picks came on the variance down, third down. Almost 9 out of every 10 turnover-worthy plays for Dak actually resulted in a turnover. The average for the quarterbacks last season was roughly 7 out of 10. So there's a lot of phony stuff in some of his numbers. When Dak didn't turn it over, he was quarterback 4 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation, only trailing Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Tua. And Mike McCarthy literally fired his OC and changed the entire offense because of a problem that occurred 4% of the time without realizing that the 4% was surely going to positively regress because of the bad luck and the variance. You look this year, it's just like it's a lot of short, generic, uncreative early down throws, rarely to the most threatening part of the field. If you look at the route trees, they're so bad Receivers are struggling to separate. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, you go back to the Packers days towards the end, everyone was talking about how simple Mike McCarthy's route trees were for his receivers and how easy they were to defend.
It was one of the biggest criticism and why the relationship fractured between him and Aaron Rodgers.
Only Washington and Pittsburgh have a higher rate of pass plays where receivers fail to get open. And much of it is scheme. You look at the prior 2 seasons with Kellen Moore, the Cowboys were a top 10 offense on average. Through 5 weeks this season, Dallas is 19th throwing it and 22nd running it. Tony Pollard looks like a shell of himself. And I think that's probably one of the key points tonight, is you mentioned that offensive line health kind of fully together again against a far lesser class of opponent than what they faced last week in the 49ers. And right now, the Chargers defense 28th in rush efficiency. So you'd hope Tony Pollard gets fired up tonight. CeeDee Lamb has a plus matchup in the slot against Jaisir Taylor. That's a matchup he needs to win, especially if he wants to get paid this offseason. You have Dean Leonard and Gilman, and they're doubtful in the Chargers secondary. J.C. Jackson got traded away. Now, barring any setbacks, it appears both Derwin James and Joey Bosa are going to play tonight for the Chargers. But this very much, to me, if you're going to see a lot of the zone defense that the Chargers typically employ, and who knows, with 2 weeks to prepare, we've seen Brandon Staley, to your point, come out with some creative game plans. Maybe he popped on the film. He understands the 49ers might not have the best cover corners, but they were able to play man and do a sufficient job. So maybe we see a little bit more man, but in general, the Chargers play some zone. So you might get lucky in some of that short horizontal stuff will work. The problem is you're not attacking the threatening part of the field ever, which is the middle. You need to be able to attack that area, especially with CeeDee Lamb and that Jaisir Taylor matchup. Get Tony Pollard going on the ground. But I just don't know if there's going to be a ton of success here, even against Chargers defense that, is probably not playing to the form that you would think when you have a defensive-minded head coach and all the money allocated to that side of the ball.
Yeah, there is no doubt that this is a Chargers stop unit that is underwhelmed, and that may be an overly generous term. I know some of the flash stats have been there. People want to talk about Khalil Mack and his 6-sack game that we saw, but the reality of it is week in, week out, and down, the Chargers not exactly going out there and performing at a very high level. The Cowboys defense has shown flashes, Payne, but you dig into the opponents that they face so far this year, and there's a lot more noise in the numbers at this point than what may have transpired the week those games were played, and Dan Quinn will be a big part of the equation today since he obviously leads his Cowboys defense against an offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore that's familiar with what the Cowboys want to do on the defensive side. And Quinn had no answers for a coach that he was all too familiar with last week in Kyle Shanahan. Shanahan was one step ahead, the proverbial playing chess, while Dan Quinn was playing checkers. When we look at this Cowboys team, their defense allowed more points in the Week 5 loss at San Francisco than Weeks 1 through 4 combined. I mean, since Trevon Diggs tore his ACL, the Cowboys have been 21st in some of the defensive efficiency metrics and not performing at a high level. In steps the Chargers offense with Justin Herbert, who may have to operate primarily out of the shotgun, does get a key weapon back in Austin Eckler, but trying to figure out who his secondary receiving options are going to be with the injury to Mike Williams that was season-ending. Keenan Allen doing things at an all-time high, but other than Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler, who may be 100%, where do the Chargers have a path to success, if any, against this Dan Quinn-led defense?
Well, that's the interesting component to this, is this is probably the game that Kellen Moore circled. And you would hope that he's going to come up with something creative. And Dan Quinn's defense to this point has been very straightforward. Now it's worked, right? We're sending pressure. We're getting after the quarterback. We're going to have that front four hunt. We're going to be aggressive. They showed a lot of cover one man against the 49ers. And they just said, hey, come and beat us. And because the talent in the back half is lacking, when you're able to protect it up, there's going to be some opportunities in the back. Now, you hit it perfectly in the last time that we saw Justin Herbert. He was dealing with a fractured finger on his non-throwing hand. Struggled mightily against a poor Raiders defense that got pressure and took away the middle of the field. And that, to me, is the key to this game. You have to be able to attack the middle of the field because that's where Dallas is getting a little thin, right? It's kind of that back half of the defense. No Leighton Vander Esch in the middle. And I think a lot of people maybe are of the understanding that he hasn't performed to where he was drafted, and certainly that's the case. But if you look at some of the on-off field splits, he's kind of been that guy for them. Damone Clark will be relied on to fill Leighton Vander Esch's role. He's really the only healthy linebacker on the roster that has been there since the start of the season. The kid they drafted out of Texas, whose name is slipping my mind, Todd, he left with an injury prior to the start of the season. Tore his knee up. There's talk.
Was that DeMarvion Overshawn?
Yep,
I can't remember.
That's exactly who it is. Yep.
Okay.
And now there's talks of having Jaron Kearse in more of that linebacker role. So now you're taking away from your secondary that's already depleted because you're going to move Kearse and have him play a little bit of that linebacker role. So I would expect tonight you're going to see lots of 2 tight end, heavier set packages for Kellen Moore and the Chargers offense that stresses the middle of the field with those linebackers and safeties of the Cowboys. You mentioned Austin Eckler returning. He has been one of the best running backs through the early part of the season, so it's good to get him back. When you look at like expected run value in terms of his ability was fantastic. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to fire up the run game tonight, but I think him as a passing valve certainly helps, especially if you can't find someone in the slot to recreate Mike Williams. And you're kind of, Joshua Palmer's a little bit dinged up, but he should be able to go. But it's basically him and Johnston. Maybe you're moving Keenan Allen to the slot a little bit more tonight, but you have to figure out how to get the middle of that throw game working, especially tonight. The Raiders just completely took that away. And you got to be able to attack the most threatening part of the field, especially with these injuries tonight. So to me, that's the key. When you watch the Chargers tonight, are they lining up in a little bit heavier set formations? Are they attacking the middle of the field? Because that's kind of where they need to start doing that a little bit better, and that's seemingly where Dallas is vulnerable tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Keenan Allen, 35 catches so far this season, 434 yards, the most receptions through 4 games of a season in Chargers team history. And Justin Herbert obviously has reaped those benefits at nearly an 80% completion rate and 9.9 yards per attempt when targeting Keenan Allen this season. You highlighted some of the concerns from Justin Herbert and the performance against the Raiders. It was actually a career low 24 attempts and 167 passing yards. His legs has provided just as much value, running a couple in against the silver and black. We'll see what we get from Eckler. One last thing I want to ask you about with the Chargers, when we look at their offensive line and the absence of Corey Linsley, who you hope is able to get the heart issue under control that sent him to IR. How big a hole is that along the offensive line for a team, knowing that Linsley was one of the more underrated players, not just with the Chargers, but even during his time in Green Bay as well?
Yeah, he is one of the best centers in all of football. His relationship with Justin Herbert is very difficult to replace. So you have some issues already on the right side of your line as it stands, and now all of a sudden you have this hole in the center. That becomes the ultimate chess game of this is where is Dan Quinn going to send some pressures from? And that's why I think a guy like Austin Eckler, if you're able to get the ball out to him a little bit quicker tonight, use him as more of a pass catcher than a runner, it might be able to solve some of those issues. But ultimately it comes down to keeping Justin Herbert upright and hopefully attacking the middle of the field. This is an interesting game because we've had some back and forth here. You know, the idea that you said at the top that we know there isn't going to be a home field advantage for the Chargers most weeks, but tonight, the Cowboys, it's going to be a Cowboys pro fan, and you're looking at, you know, kind of bouncing back and forth. When we get to like 2.5, sometimes some Chargers get bought. Chargers were kind of one of the sharper teaser legs this week. The total is interesting because I think the mindset in general is, you know, you're thinking Cowboys offense, you're thinking Chargers offense. Would not shock me at all to see this come off the key of 51, even though the public will probably be running to bet the over here.
Makes a ton of sense. Look, some of these primetime games haven't been that exciting. Last night's game delivered for all the wrong reasons between the Bills and Giants. Thursday night's game largely put us to sleep, but there was plenty of point spread drama to keep people glued to the edge of their seats in that 19-8 Chiefs win. Tonight, from an X's and O's standpoint, should be a phenomenal way to end Week 6 before we pivot to what should be one of the better Thursday night games we'll see all year between the Jags and Saints this coming week. All right, my friend, I think we've done enough damage for this Monday morning. Wasn't sure if there were any words of wisdom, life advice you'd like to share with our listenership before we reconvene on Wednesday and go back, diving into the deep end of the pool, attacking the college football board with a massive, and I mean massive, matchup in the Big Ten that'll highlight some of our breakdowns.
Ohio State, Penn State. Looking forward to that one on Wednesday.
Should be a lot of fun. So, we've ranted more than we like. The NFL season has continued to be a challenge, and it's not going to stop us from backing down, putting in the hard work. Remember, there's a lot of people out there providing content that aren't winning and losing with you, the listeners. Rest assured, when you guys lose, we're losing, and then some with a lot of these games. We'll get this NFL ship turned around sooner rather than later. The gambling gods will smile upon us, and the heater is right around the corner. Best of luck with all of your wagers and investments tonight in the Chargers and Cowboys. And we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.